Well, good morning. I'm glad all of you have had a good Father's Day and that you honored your fathers if you have one living, if you have a father that you looked hard to. And I'm glad that it was a good event for you. And we're going to proceed with our uh, lecture beginning this morning. And of course, we're going to start with chapter 6, and we're going to begin um, with the slide presentation or the PowerPoint presentation. And so I just want to tell y'all welcome, and I'm glad you are here. And so we're getting ready to start the slideshow, and we're going to start it from this slide here. This is chapter 6, committing to an issue, building agendas. Now, we may not finish this lecture today. If not, we will continue on tomorrow, which is Tuesday, and the 19th. So, let us begin the lecture. This is chapter 6, committing to an issue, building agendas. So, policy advocates' first challenge is to set or get a specific policy issue or on decision makers' agendas in an agency, community, or legislative setting. They have to use a combination of political, interactional, and analytical skills to place their issues on decision makers' agendas. Now, we've already discussed the skills, the political interaction, and analytic skills in previous lectures. This chapter discusses the importance of agenda building processes to policy practice. The 3 stages of agenda building: diagnosing, softening, and activating. The 3 stages, I repeat, the 3 stages of agenda building, which are diagnosing, softening, and activating. We will discuss today the diagnosing stage of agenda building. Tuesday, we hope to discuss the softening stage, and Wednesday, we will discuss the activating stage. Number 2, this chapter discusses how social problems and solutions reach agendas, how political processes shape agendas, how windows of opportunity and policy entrepreneurs shape agendas, how direct service staff can build agendas, and the challenges policy advocates face in shaping agendas. So, how do we know when an issue is on the agenda? Let's look at in the legislative session. When legislation has been introduced into the legislative process and referred to a committee and has attracted the serious attention of some legislators. In agency settings, we know when it has become part of the agency deliberation. Example, a task force or committee to study it has been formed. In community settings, we know when an issue is on an agenda, when community leaders and decision makers have decided to take it seriously enough to convene meetings to consider resolutions. Such as in Tyler, Texas, they're discussing the renaming of 2 schools, Robert E. Lee and John Tyler. So here's a few words of caution. Placing issues or proposals on agendas does not necessarily have a positive outcome. Many issues never reach the agenda because opposing groups successfully use tactics to keep them off the agenda. Placement on the agenda does not tell us precisely what kind of proposal or solution will finally emerge. Proposals are finalized in the give and take of deliberations. And another way of saying it, proposals are finalized through compromising of the deliberations. So the first step, your immediate challenge is to convene others, preferably decision makers, that the problem merits their serious attention. You must place the issue on the agenda so that someone will examine the issue in more detail or delegate it to others for further exploration. You must try to create a favorable condition, interest, and support for a policy reform at the outset. Why agenda building is needed? Number one, with legislators, they must limit the number of issues that they consider and must rank them in some order. If they were to debate the thousands of pieces of legislation introduced each session, they will work to exhaustion and not give careful attention to many of them. Legislators must reserve their scarce time for those pieces of legislation they most want to concentrate on. They avoid issues that appear to give them little or no political advantage in re-election. However, they are sometimes attracted to issues associated with conflict if such issues can gain them support among their constituents. In agency executives have many tasks that occupy their time, including policy issues. They must ignore or defer many issues, else they would become exhausted and frustrated. They ignore or defer certain issues because they would embroil the agency in conflict. Policy advocates must convince them that a specific policy innovation will help an agency increase its resources and attract more support rather than diminishing it or having no effect on the agency's ability to survive. Why agenda building is needed in communities. Agenda building occurs in community settings as various issues vie for attention. Advocates may introduce ideas to community groups, the media, city or town councils, school boards, or other community influentials. They may draw attention to a policy proposed by getting a story in the mass media, holding a community forum, or staging a protest. The ultimate goal is to persuade community decision makers to prioritize the issue in their deliberations. So, agenda building funnel. Policy advocacy must understand the agenda building funnel. There are many potential issues that exist in a setting. A specific issue is placed on the decision agenda when someone or some group prioritizes it for systematic deliberation. It then enters policy deliberations where it is waylaid, defeated, or enacted. So here are the challenges in agenda building. Challenge number one, diagnose the context. Policy advocates must diagnose the context to identify contextual constraints and opportunities. If they decide that specific policies will be extremely difficult to change, they must work to change the context or to focus on alternative policy changes. If they decide that the contextual opportunities far outnumber the constraints, they can initiate a policy change and strategy at once. In some cases, the prognosis will be guarded or unclear. Challenges number 2. Soften the context. Policy advocates must make the context more amenable to the specific policy initiative. They might have conversations with strategy place persons, or work with a coalition or advocacy group to pressure decision makers to take interest in a specific issue. Challenge number 3, activate challenge. Policy advocates must get a decision maker or a legislature to put an issue on the agenda of the other decision makers in the agency, community, or legislative setting. Agency agenda building is usually a precursor to other policy practice tasks. Even if a proposal is developed first, advocates must return to agenda building to get the issue on decision makers' agendas. Otherwise, they find their issues stymied for lack of interest in them. Prior to writings of John Kingston, many people ignored the agenda building task. They conveyed that policy reforms magically appeared with no prior work by policy practitioners. Rationalists assume that decision makers place issues on agendas only when they receive technical support or reports or data that recommends a specific change. Incrementalists assume that administrators and legislators only introduce modest changes in existing policies in response to complaints or pressures. Yet others promote the garbage can theory of agenda building, which is, particularly in agency settings, most policy problems and solutions remain in a state of limbo, a figurative garbage can, until they are placed on the agendas of decision makers at a later point in time. Moderate problems and solutions also exist in the garbage cans of legislators. Agenda building is a precursor to actual deliberations. It gets specific issues or policies on the table to be followed by actual deliberations, where they are proceeded by committees or processed by committees and legislators. What is actually enacted or approved is only a small fraction of the issues and policies that are proposed. So let's look at the diagnostic stage. When diagnosing the context, policy advocates must analyze streams of problems and solutions, recent professional decisions and trends, and political realities. Streams of problems and solutions. Policy advocates must consider the kinds of problems and solutions that have already been considered in a setting. By doing so, they discover where their issue fits into the larger picture and a better sense of their issue's prognosis. They can examine developments in an agency or community during recent years to see that a problem stream exists. A stream of solutions also exists in agency, community, and legislative settings. So, solutions can be classified in 3 groups. Group number 1, specific programs. Example, Interventions to help children, single mothers, or older people. Number two, those that aim to correct institutional problems. Example, financing a program, changing an agency's fees, structure, or enhancing collaboration to serve a specific group, to serve a specific client group. Number three, methods of making decisions. Example, setting up a task force, establishing a committee, or organizing an interagency planning committee. Recent professional developments and trends. Fads and trends can powerfully shape the prognosis of a policy reform. Example, a push in the 1990s for collaboration, recent promotion of evidence-based practice. They can also be discerned by examining professional journals, talking with professionals, and analyzing the kinds of innovations that funders prioritize. Problems and solution streams exist in a culture context rather in nations or in specific settings. It is important to be familiar with the culture of specific settings to better understand the kinds of innovations that are relatively feasible to them. Political realities. Political developments powerfully influence whether specific issues will be placed on policy agendas. Policy advocates need to consider the viewpoints of important officials by finding out what position they have taken on similar issues or reforms in the past. They also need to consider court rulings that are germane to their issue. Another political realities. In agency settings, they must consider many factors that shape the prognosis of a specific reform, such as whether it is consonant with the mission statement, the state of the budget, the funder interest, the position of accredited bodies. In communities, they must consider the viewpoints of the community leaders, the public, and of course, mass media. Factors that suggest when a specific policy innovation will be difficult to achieve. The sheer magnitude of the proposed policy change, whether the issue is already politicized, whether persons with considerable power believe that specific policy change will harm their economic, professional, or political self-interest. Whether a specific reform will be expensive or difficult to implement. Now we're looking at the softening stage. Policy advocates can attempt to enhance the prognosis of a policy reform even before it enters policy deliberation by working in problem and solution stream building political support. Working in problem and solution streams. Those who want decision makers to take their problem seriously have to convince them that it is a problem and not merely a condition. A problem poses a threat or danger to someone, rather a group in the population, an agency, or politicians themselves. Problems are most likely to be viewed as important because it is believed that someone will suffer dire consequences if it is not addressed. So how do we convince other people that certain conditions are problems? Number one, the data. To argue that a condition is serious, it is absolute numbers that some subset of the population is afflicted for more than other portions of the population, or that the problem is becoming steadily worse. To demonstrate that a specific social problem has important implications that extend beyond a specific issue or population. Number two, how do we convince other people that certain conditions are problems? Language and terminology. Use words such as crisis to describe a condition. Refer to a social program as investing in humans' needs rather than merely spending resources. Potential for success. Demonstrate that a problem is not hopeless and can be ameliorated. Find successful pilot projects that demonstrates that specific reforms will yield positive outcomes. Number four, appeal to values, such as the ethical principles of benefits, social justice, and fairness. Illustrate with specific case studies of persons who suffer from problems. Number five, state problems in relatively broad terms. Present problems in general terms. Frame them as important to significant segments of legislators' constituencies. Number six, cost efficiency. Try to show that a policy will avert subsequent costly problems. Prevention can be a double-edged sword. Most people prefer preventing a problem to fixing it afterwards. But decision makers often view prevention negatively. They often want to prioritize services for those already afflicted with a problem rather than to fund prevention. Advocates need to find evidence that they can successfully avert problems when proposing a policy. Example would be Hurricane Harvey. The prevention would have been to set up the levees and to prioritize the flood zones and setting up drainage systems that would immediately take away the rain and still allowing it to accumulate and flood. That would have been prevention, but they rather wait until it happened and then try to fix the problem after it has begun, rather than avert the problem with prevention measures. Advocates need to anticipate likely objections or opposition to a specific policy so they can diminish or rebut them. As they successfully counter objections, they soften the context, making it easier not only to get an issue placed on the agenda, but to get a reform enacted. The media can serve as an important educational tool. Only certain solutions make it to agency or legislative agendas. Decision makers will examine the fiscal, administrative, and political feasibility of those solutions. They will also judge a solution's likely effectiveness and technical merits. Policy advocates must try to place a solution in a favorable light if they want it to get onto decision makers' agendas. Political realities. Soften the context by diminishing opposition. Talk with persons in strategic positions to educate them about the needs for a specific reform. Directly address their concerns or objections. Correct erroneous information. Construct a big tent with many perspectives, even divergent ones. Be open to input from a variety of people. Have good listening skills to understand various POWs. Be willing to compromise. The use of tactics. So here we're moving into the activation stage. The use of tactics such as timing, coupling, negotiating, assimilating early sponsors and supporters, and routing to pull an issue into the decision funnel is usually done by a policy entrepreneur, a decision maker, legislator, chairperson, executive, or other person who has the power to pull an issue into an agenda so that it will receive serious consideration. This is what we call a policy entrepreneur, a person who has the power to pull an issue into an agenda so that it will receive serious consideration. Timing and window of opportunity. Relatively brief moments when the time is ripe for a specific initiative. Key events can sensitize legislators to a specific issue. Example, September 11th, Hurricane Katrina. The results of an investigation, a shift in minority control from one party to another, annual budget preparations, a new head of government or new executive director. Windows of opportunity often close rapidly. Timing and windows of opportunity still in strategizing. Political advocates should, number one, prepare for an opportunity by analyzing an issue or a problem. Number two, recognize when a window of opportunity occurs well for it. Number three, seize the moment by seeking support for placing it on the decision agenda. Coupling. Making imaginative connections between solutions, problems, and political streams. Example, connecting a stimulus package with other social problems such as homelessness. Framing and finding titles, putting a twist on proposals to make them appealing to decision makers. Example, portray a benefit as the earned benefit to make it difficult for opponents to argue that it is a welfare benefit. Change it from a give to an earned. Negotiating and bargaining, accommodating different points of view, even before an issue appears on the decision agenda. Try to create a win-win atmosphere that allows different people and fractions to believe they will each have a piece of the action. Assembling early sponsors and supporters, enlisting people to sponsor a legislative proposal by placing their names on it. They should be powerful politicians who are also represent an array of perspectives. Solicit their advice and make them part of the planning process. Routing. This is all in the activating stage. Find a home-based fund issue by routing it to decision makers who want to resolve it in ways that are acceptable. This involves deciding which committee should get jurisdiction. Media coverage, getting timely coverage of proposals, using the media to get stories about activities printed or placed on television. Can direct service staff help to build agendas? Here's the answer. Legislators and high-level agency staffs are best situated to assume pivotal roles in building agendas. However, direct service staff can participate in agenda building in both agency and legislative settings. Direct service staff can work within their agencies to locate unaddressed or poorly addressed community needs. Read professional literature and find evidence-based practices that could be but are not implemented in specific settings. Join coalitions and advocacy groups that already exist in the community and lend them volunteer and other support. Direct service staff can also move beyond their agencies into the broader policy world. Talk with legislative aides about specific unaddressed or poorly addressed issues that they have seen. Encourage their clients to call high-level officials or help them draft letters to these officials. Ask whether voter registration projects can be organized by their agency. Search for policy entrepreneurs who can place a specific issue on their agencies or legislative agenda. So far, the answer to can direct service staff help to build agendas? The answer is yes. Policy advocacy for powerless populations and unpopular issues. The agenda building process is often screwed against unpopular issues and powerless groups. Groups that pug away from unpopular issues and populations may be laying the groundwork for subsequent policy changes. Some policy advocates conclude that at times that they cannot secure policy initiative working solely through conventional channels. Example, abolitionists, suffragettes, and civil rights advocates. Protests can sometimes harden the position of public officials against the sought reforms. However, they can also be decision makers to help pay attention and draw public awareness to the issue. Electoral processes. Agenda building often take place within electoral process, politics. Politicians, parties, and advocates try to find issues that distinguish them from their opposition, appeal to their natural constituencies as well as to swing voters, divide the opposing party, example, wedge issues, generate support for themselves as compared to their opponents. Ideology assumes a key role in process of agenda building. The two major parties have somewhat different bases of political support. They gravitate toward somewhat different positions on issues. However, they often battle for the center, seeking policies that will appeal to centrist voters so they can gain a winning edge. Now, let's look at the two major parties. What are the two major political parties? The answer, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. These are the two major parties in the United States of America. So, developing links with advocacy groups. Policy advocates should consider connecting with an established advocacy group. Examples, join a political group or a local chapter of a national group, such as NASW. And I've told you on many occasions, and I guess I'm going to keep talking because this is a social workers group. It is the National Association of Social Workers, of which I am a member. Campaign for politicians, they believe, will put certain issues on policy agendas. Multiple skills for agenda building. Policy advocates use all 4 skills when they try to influence policy agendas. They use political skills to analyze and engage in political streams, analytic skills to develop and use data in the problem and solution streams, interactional skills to help proposals reach policy deliberations, persuade people to take specific problems seriously, participate on committees and task forces, and organize coalitions. Value clarifying skills to decide whether to invest energy in promoting an issue in the first place and to decide how to frame it. And that concludes this lecture today. Always remember the multiple skills for agenda building, and we always use these 4 skills: political skills, analytic skills, interactional skills, and value clarifying skills, of which I've gone through. We will continue with chapter 7 on Tuesday the 19th. God bless you. Be safe. Take care. And I need to receive your PowerPoint presentations for those of you who have not turned them in. I need you to upload them into JIX, our JIX system, so that I can give you a grade. Take care and be blessed.